March 4, 1944. RAF Debden, England. 06:30 hours. Captain Robert Johnson, 23, 61st Fighter Squadron, walked toward his P-51B Mustang. Mission briefing had been clear. Escort B-17s to Berlin, the German capital, 1,100 miles round trip. His crew chief pointed to the extra fuel tank behind the cockpit. New addition, sir. 85 gallons. Makes you tail-heavy on takeoff. Johnson asked, "Will it get me to Berlin and back?" Crew chief answered, "On paper, yes, sir." Paper hadn't been tested against 500 miles of German fighters. What happened over the next 6 hours would answer a question that had haunted Allied bomber crews for 2 years. Could fighters reach Berlin? By early 1944, the Allies had the bombers. B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators could reach any target in Germany. They had the firepower, carried enough bombs to flatten factories, and flew in formations designed for mutual defense. What they didn't have: protection once they crossed into Germany. American doctrine said, daylight precision bombing. Hit the factories, the refineries, the infrastructure. Crippled Germany's war production. The bombers could defend themselves with their combined firepower. Fighter escort was helpful but not essential. Reality proved different. German fighters waited beyond the range of Allied escorts. FW-190s and Bf-109s would hit bomber formations in waves. Bomber losses on deep penetration raids ran 10 to 15%. Some missions lost 20%. At those rates, bomber crew survival probability over 25 missions was statistically near zero. By January 1944, the situation had reached crisis level. 8th Air Force had 3 options: continue accepting catastrophic losses, switch to night bombing like the British, or find fighters that could go the distance. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the primary escort fighter, had range of 475 miles with drop tanks, got bombers to the German border, then had to turn back. The P-38 Lightning had better range but struggled at high altitude over Europe. Engines had chronic problems in cold weather. The P-51 Mustang had been around since 1942. British pilots loved it for low-altitude work. Americans used it for ground attack and reconnaissance. Nobody thought of it as a long-range escort fighter. Then North American aviation did something unexpected. The early P-51B had 2 wing fuel tanks, 92 gallons each, total 184 gallons. With external drop tanks, it could fly about 400 miles. Better than the P-47, but still not enough for Berlin. In December 1943, North American engineers proposed adding a fuselage tank behind the cockpit, an 85-gallon fuel cell installed in the radio compartment. Simple modification. Took 1 day to install, but it created a problem. That much fuel behind the pilot shifted the center of gravity dangerously aft, made the plane unstable, difficult to control on takeoff, nearly impossible to maneuver in combat. The solution required careful fuel management. Pilots had to burn the fuselage tank first on the way to the target. Once that tank was empty, center of gravity shifted forward to normal. Then they could fight. This meant the most dangerous part of the mission: flying 500 miles through German airspace with a plane that couldn't dogfight until it burned enough fuel. If German fighters jumped them early, pilots would have 3 choices: run, jettison all fuel and fight, or try to survive with degraded handling. The math worked on paper. Wing tanks, 184 gallons. Fuselage tank, 85 gallons. 2 75-gallon drop tanks under the wings, 150 gallons. Total, 419 gallons. At cruise efficiency, range extended to approximately 850 miles. Enough to reach Berlin with reserves. First P-51Bs with fuselage tanks arrived in England in February 1944. Pilots approached them cautiously. Test flights confirmed the handling problem. Tail-heavy configuration made formation flying difficult. Climbing was sluggish. Turning was dangerous, but the range was real. On February 20th, P-51s escorted bombers to Leipzig, 360 miles into Germany. Returned with fuel to spare. On February 25th, they went to Regensburg, 400 miles. still had fuel remaining. General Jimmy Doolittle, commanding 8th Air Force, made the decision. Berlin, March 4th. Maximum effort. 660 bombers. Full fighter escort all the way. The bombers launched at 800 hours. Behind them, 800 fighters. P-47s and P-38s for the first leg. P-51s for the deep penetration. Johnson's squadron took off at 0900. Standard procedure. Use fuselage tank on takeoff and climb. Burn it down to empty by the time you reach the combat zone. Switch to drop tanks halfway across Germany. Drop those tanks before engaging enemy fighters. Then fight on wing tanks. They crossed the Dutch coast at 20,000 feet. Luftwaffe fighters rose to meet them. WWIIs attacked the bomber stream. P-47s engaged them, then had to turn back at the German border. P-51s moved forward to take their place. Still burning fuselage fuel. Still tail-heavy. German fighters kept their distance, watching, waiting. By the time the formation reached Brunswick, 200 miles inside Germany, Johnson's fuselage tank read empty. Center of gravity shifted forward. Handling returned to normal. The Mustang felt like itself again. German fighters made their move. Bf-109s came down from 30,000 feet. Johnson's squadron turned to engage. This was the test. Could the Mustang fight after flying 400 miles? The answer was immediate. P-51s were faster than the 109s at altitude, more maneuverable than the 190s. And unlike German fighters operating at their range limit, the Mustangs had fuel to keep fighting. Johnson shot down 2 Bf-109s in 10 minutes. His squadron claimed 9 more. They stayed with the bombers all the way to Berlin. Over the capital, German anti-aircraft fire was intense. Fighters swarmed. But the bombers hit their targets. And for the first time, they had fighter cover over Berlin itself. On the return flight, Johnson checked his fuel. Wing tanks still half full. Drop tanks long gone. But enough fuel to make it home with reserve. They landed at Debden at 15:30 hours. Flight time, 6.5 hours. Not one P-51 lost to fuel exhaustion. Several shot down in combat, but the range problem was solved. March 4th, mission results. 69 bombers lost, 11 fighters lost, but 170 German fighters destroyed. More importantly, the psychological impact was devastating to German defense. When German pilots reported American fighters over Berlin, Luftwaffe command initially didn't believe them, assumed they were misidentified. No single-engine fighter could reach Berlin from England. It was aerodynamically impossible, except it wasn't. Captured German pilots, interrogated after March 4th, expressed disbelief. One Bf-109 pilot, shot down near Berlin, asked his interrogators, "How did Mustangs reach Berlin?" "We calculated." "Not possible. You must have bases in Poland." Interrogator explained, "One fuselage tank, 85 gallons, changes everything." The pilot sat silent for a moment, then said, "If you can escort to Berlin, you can escort anywhere. We have lost air superiority over our own capital." He was right. After March 4th, Luftwaffe effectiveness declined rapidly. German fighters had to engage with American escorts present. That changed the odds from favorable to even, then from even to unfavorable. By April 1944, P-51s were flying deep escort missions routinely. Berlin, Munich, Vienna, Ploiesti. Anywhere bombers went, Mustangs went. Loss rates for bombers dropped from 10% to 3.5%. German fighter losses increased to unsustainable levels. Luftwaffe. General Adolf Galland, reviewing March 1944 operations, wrote in his report to Hermann Göring, "The appearance of long-range American escort fighters over Reich territory represents a fundamental shift in the air war. Our fighters can no longer wait beyond escort range to attack bombers. We must engage with American fighters present. This changes calculations entirely. We are now losing 2 fighters for every bomber we destroy. This ratio cannot be sustained." Göring's response was to blame the pilots. Galland's response was to state the obvious. The Americans solved the range problem. We did not expect this. The technical achievement was remarkable not for complexity, but for simplicity. Adding 85 gallons of fuel capacity sounds easy, but it required understanding weight distribution, fuel management, and operational procedures. Other nations had long-range fighters. The Japanese Zero had exceptional range, but it achieved that by sacrificing armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and pilot protection. One burst of fire and it burned. The Mustang kept its protection, kept its firepower, kept its performance, added range without sacrificing anything except convenience. Pilots had to manage fuel carefully, but they could manage it. The fuselage tank modification spread to all P-51 production. By summer 1944, every Mustang rolling off the line had the 85-gallon tank. Later versions added even larger drop tanks, extending range to over 1,000 miles. The strategic impact was decisive. Germany couldn't defend its industry if American fighters could reach any target. Couldn't rebuild aircraft production if factories were being destroyed faster than they could produce replacements. By war's end, P-51s had destroyed 4,150 German aircraft in the air and 4,131 on the ground. They flew 230,173 sorties, lost 2,520 aircraft, giving them one of the best loss ratios of any fighter in the war. But the real impact wasn't the destruction. It was the presence. German fighters couldn't attack bombers without fighting through escorts first. That changed the air war from a bombing campaign with fighter support to an air superiority campaign with bombing as the objective. General Karl Spaatz, commanding U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, stated it clearly in June 1944. The P-51 is the reason we control the skies over Germany. Not because it shoots down more planes, though it does, but because it can be anywhere, anytime. German fighters can't hide beyond our range anymore. There is no beyond our range. Robert Johnson survived the war. 27 confirmed kills. Returned to the United States in 1944. Worked for Republic Aviation after the war. Rarely spoke publicly about his combat experiences. When asked about the March 4th Berlin mission, his answer was consistent. We had enough fuel to get there. That was new. Changed everything. He passed away in 1998, age 77. Aviation historians consider him one of the great fighter aces, but he never claimed credit for the Berlin mission being significant. To him, it was logistics solved correctly. His crew chief from Debden, Master Sergeant Frank Miller, was interviewed in 1994 at age 74. He remembered the fuselage tank installation. We worked all night installing those tanks. Engineers said it would make the plane tail-heavy. Pilots said it would be dangerous on takeoff. But everyone knew if we didn't solve the range problem, bomber crews would keep dying. So we installed them. Turns out it worked. Sometimes the simple solution is the right solution. German aviation engineer Hermann Horst, who analyzed captured P-51s in 1944, wrote post-war, "The American approach was brute force elegance. They did not redesign the aircraft. They added fuel capacity in the simplest way possible and taught pilots to manage the handling quirks. We would have spent months engineering a perfect solution. They spent days implementing a working solution. In war, working beats perfect. Today, the principle is taught at test pilot schools. Range can be extended by adding fuel capacity, but only if you solve the weight distribution problem. The P-51 solution. Burn the unbalancing fuel first, before you need to maneuver. Simple, effective, proven in combat. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, there's a P-51D with external and internal fuel tank configuration displayed. Plaque explains the 85-gallon fuselage tank modification. Visitors can see the fuel cell location behind the cockpit. Next to the aircraft, there's a logbook from March 4th, 1944. Open to Captain Johnson's entry. Flight time 6 hours 30 minutes. Fuel remaining 20 gallons. Notes: Berlin. First time. Plenty of range. Mustang performed as advertised. The lesson isn't about aviation. It's about problem solving. When you face an impossible problem, sometimes the answer isn't exotic. It's adding what's missing in the simplest way possible and dealing with the side effects. Berlin was 550 miles from England. P-51s without fuselage tanks could fly 400 miles. The gap was 150 miles. The solution was 85 gallons of fuel. Not a new engine. Not a new airframe, just more fuel in a smart location with proper procedures. Next time you face a problem that seems impossible, ask, what's the simplest thing I could add or change that would close the gap? Might not be elegant, might create new complications. But if it works, it works. March 4, 1944. American fighters appeared over Berlin. German pilots couldn't believe it. Their commanders asked, "How?" The answer, 85 gallons of fuel and pilots willing to manage it carefully. Sometimes the war isn't won by the best technology. It's won by the best use of available technology. The Mustang didn't become a great fighter because it was perfect. It became great because engineers kept improving it, and pilots kept pushing it further, and that's usually how you win. Not by waiting for perfect, by making good better, then proving it works under fire.